You talk about a president who came into office in probably one of the more polarizing times, at least in my lifetime here. He was not necessarily a popular president, despite winning the popular vote. I am curious as to how the public reaction has been to his handling of recent events, whether it's inflation, whether it's Ukraine, and everything else in between.
Well, Romaine, coming into the State of the Union this past Tuesday, he came in with his lowest approval ratings on record so far, 39%, according to the NPR poll. And, he really needed the speech to reset the narrative for his presidency. And both flash polls right after the speech showed it was very well received, though 70% approving of the speech. And we expected about a 3 to 4 point bump for his approval rating, but he actually got an unusually high bounce of over 8%. And so he's now at 47% in the NPR poll. He also was doing well with respect to handling of Ukraine. He got an 18-point bump up to 52% for handling of COVID. He went from 47 to 55%. And handling the economy, which is the ultimate question, he got an 8-point bump up to 45%.
But how long does something like that last? I mean, does that stick?
That's the real question. And unfortunately for President Biden, a lot of this is out of his control. If you look at the main issues we're dealing with today, well, while he can handle the Ukraine situation the best he can, he's not really in control of that situation. If you look at inflation, he can do things with supply chain, et cetera, but he can't really control inflation. If you look at fighting crime in your neighborhood, he can't control that, but he can talk about what he's doing to help, but he really can't control it. So it's not really in his control.
It's certainly not in his control. And of course, as I'm sure you know, presidents get blamed for a lot of things that they shouldn't get blamed for. And then, of course, they get a lot of credit for things that they probably shouldn't get credit for. There's going to be a counter narrative here from the Republican Party, particularly heading into a midterm election season here. What is that counter narrative right now?
Well, the counter narrative from the Republicans is going to be that President Biden did not prevent war in Ukraine. President Biden, while he got out of Afghanistan like the American people wanted, the way in which he got out was not the way he did. And then also inflation. This is his fault. He's passed all these bills, spending all this money. That's their narrative. He's trying to counter that by saying, look, I did these things to fight COVID. I did these things to get American people back to work. And also with Ukraine, I'm doing all I can. In fact, you can credit me for uniting NATO against Putin, even though it's Putin who actually did what no one else could do by invading Ukraine. He united NATO, made it stronger, got countries like Switzerland to abandon their neutrality stance, and also getting Sweden and Finland to actually consider joining NATO. So it's a combination, but the Republicans are definitely going to come after him on a lot of those issues.
Does foreign policy matter that much to voters these days?
Foreign policy matters most with respect to whether or not the president is showing strength and leadership as a commander in chief, and it shows that he has a firm hand on the till in representing America. And so I think while Afghanistan and the way the withdrawal happened there, that did not show him strong and it embarrassed the United States. But with Ukraine, him being able to unite the allies in Europe and to be able to push back on Putin with strong sanctions, I think has shown him to be strong. So the jury's out in the long term, but I think right now he's doing pretty well as of this week.
But some of the options that he's taken so far with regards to the economic sanctions, there is, of course, always the risk that there is a ripple effect that comes back here into the U.S. economy, primarily through inflation, whether it's higher gas prices or higher food prices or just general economic instability here. How does he buffet against that?
Well, let's go to the potential oil ban that a lot of Republicans and Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi, have been in favor of. The reason that the administration has been resistant to that is because they do not want any more shock into gas prices, especially in this inflationary environment. So their argument is, hey, we want to put as much pain on Russia as possible and minimize the pain on the American people. Because at the beginning, the American people might be behind such an oil ban, but if it impacts their day-to-day, going to their groceries, their gas prices, they're not going to be in favor of it. So it's a short-term gain, but long-term potential pain, depending on how it rolls out.
But we've already seen substantial gains at the gas pump, particularly since he's taken office now. Whether he should be blamed for that is certainly debatable, but it's real, it's tangible. A lot of people who go to the grocery store, they look at the prices on that receipt and they realize they're paying a lot more today than what they were paying for just a few months ago here. Is there anything more than just a narrative that he can do that's going to make people, I guess, at least feel, if not better about the situation, at least like it's not his fault or his party's fault?
Yeah, that's a tough one, Romaine. And so, look, he's going to have a lot of people who are much in favor of him doing, strategic petroleum reserve, which he already did, but that's a short-term thing. Talking about supply chain and helping with that, but that takes too long to actually be felt. The thing he needs to hope for, and like I said, it's out of his control, is that we have reached that part in our cycle where by the second quarter, inflation will have peaked. The problem is that the Ukraine situation has destabilized everything. And you've seen with cargo prices going up, with air cargo prices going, with not being able to fly over Russian territory. There's all kinds of uncertainties that are entering the market right now. And we're just in a very uncertain time.
Do you see any sort of risk of military involvement, military escalation?
So there's always a risk, Romaine. But I think, as you've seen from President Biden, repeatedly from the NATO secretary as well, they've all been very clear that we want to support President Zelensky and the Ukrainians as much as we can without actually putting boots on the ground and getting directly involved. And so I think as long as there's no direct involvement, I think it's more unlikely that we actually have a wider spread. But you never know. I mean, with President Putin and people questioning where he is right now mentally, he may be trying to poke the bear with NATO, going into Poland and having flight incursions. Anything can happen. There could be something can happen. But I think NATO and President Biden is very focused on not having the spread. And that's why there hasn't been a commitment to actually put troops on the ground.
The other big foreign policy issue, at least one of the big unresolved foreign policy issues, is, of course, the relationship with China, at least the trade relationship and economic relationship, a relationship that still remains frayed. And now, of course, with Russia's incursion into Ukraine, it's raising a lot of questions about where China will stand and whether there is a future for economic ties, stronger economic ties between the U.S. and China.
Yes, that is one of the biggest issues that we've been watching and others have been watching, because China is doing a couple things. Number one, they're watching very closely what's going on here, and they're kind of extrapolating to what does that mean for us vis-a-vis if we will ever want to go into Taiwan. So they're watching this, and I think they've seen a lot of strength from America and the European allies to actually respond. The other part is that while they want to stay close to Russia, they don't want a lot of the what's the word? They've been, I mean, basically right now, Russia is a rogue state. They're vilified in the world community, and they want to avoid that at all costs. So you can see them trying to walk that tightrope of doing enough to help Russia, but not being seen as this Russian ally and letting Russia do whatever it wants.
We started off talking about the president's approval ratings, about the polarization here in the United States with regards to politics here. Is it possible at all that the situation going on right now in Ukraine and the global reaction to it, that this could actually be not just a unifying force for the developed world, but actually a unifying force within our own borders?
So I think you make a great point. Number one, like I said before, it has unified NATO in ways we've never seen. We see the Germans now actually trying to fulfill its 2% military commitment of its GDP to its military as part of NATO. You've seen people wanting to join NATO. And then at home, at the beginning of the speech, the State of the Union speech, you definitely saw President Biden rallying everyone. You saw Republicans and Democrats unified behind the crisis in Ukraine. And I think there are things from that he can take and move forward. The problem, Romaine, is that we're in the middle of election season. We have midterm elections coming up in November. And while this will last for a little bit, you've already seen it break off a little bit with respect to the oil prices, even though some Democrats support it. They're going to be looking for ways in which to distinguish themselves in Congress from the president to make gains in November.